Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Satsang. Finally, we were able to connect with the internet, and it seems that it's going to be stable. For those who are not aware, we use WhatsApp as a means of communication. The number appears there. You can send your questions directly to me. It makes it more fluid, the interaction, and it's completely private. So those who are listening, they will not know who asked the question, and that is good. Okay, let's make some silence first. Silencing. Silence is not a temporary absence of noise. For the seeker of truth, silence begins with silencing all personal wants, all personal desires connected to the spiritual, to the seeker of well-being, all desires about life except liberation, truth, God. But truth, God, not as a means for happiness, not as something that has a circumstantial meaning, but as the end of itself. Silencing all wants, all desires. Staying in that place of freedom. Freedom from the character. Freedom from investments. That is the silence that is needed to start with. The story of the individual that recognizes himself in circumstances, in a life, those characteristics of life, they differ according to circumstances and other factors which I'm not going to get into now. Karma and all those things. And depending on this individual story, it can have more apparent circumstances that are filled with spiritual circumstances, spiritual knowledge or information, spiritual practices, and all of this. Or not. It can be absent of all these things. And we could say that if the life of the individual is filled with these spiritual circumstances, so that is a spiritual quest, someone in a spiritual quest. Well, in a way, it can be seen like this, opposed to the other that doesn't have any of these visible circumstances. And this is why I make a little distinction, only for the purpose of comprehending, into this spiritual seeker, and the seeker of well-being, and the seeker of truth. So circumstances, they differ from individual to individual, And that doesn't mean anything, absolutely anything. What really shows and determines this quest for truth is something that only each and every one of you can see by yourselves in your own reflections. The seeker of well-being is filled with desires like anyone else, and he wants it all. He wants the worldly life, the worldly desires, comfort, relationships, all of those things. And he also wants the divine, the absolute, everything. He wants everything. So there's no room. It makes no sense. Sacrifices, austerities, and all these things. It doesn't make any sense in his mind because it is countering his nature. The seeker of truth is still filled with desires like anyone else, and they might be stronger or weaker, that depends in which stage of his work he is, but he wants just freedom, just liberation, just the divine, nothing else. So their visions, their realities will be very different. The doors that opens for them, they are quite different in nature. The seeker of well-being struggles. He can struggle very intensely. Yes, he can be a very powerful seeker, but he struggles for the realization, for the gratification in whatever sphere, worldly, spiritual, of that individual entity. He tries to transform, reshape, adapt, improve this personality to make it more suitable to all these desires that come. Worldly desires, spiritual desires, all of this. So his work, as intense that it may be, it is something. It is called an investment. An investment that ensures profits towards this individual. The seeker of truth, or the one that aspires truth, well, he is in a very different work. He can also be very intense or not, depends. But his work is completely different. As he gets assailed by these desires, these individual desires that are there luring, like they do everyone, they lure your attention to keep you distracted. They are pushing them away, pushing them away. It doesn't matter if it is the promise of gratification or if it is gratification itself. They are pushing it away. They are saying, affirming with their intents, with their attitudes, I don't want anything else from this world anymore. And the second thing they are taking care of is, I only want truth. I only want liberation. I only want God. And they have to make sure that this ends here. And this gives a lot of work attention, because saying I want liberation in that particular circumstance it can be something that's not naive. And what happens when you're undergoing through this work is that these individual needs gets transferred to that meaning of liberation. So the definition of liberation, the definition of God, divine romance, the definition of happiness has to remain abstract. No transfer of meaning to those words. They mean what they mean, that which you don't know what they mean. Because usually, and this is quite common, I hear this frequently, oh, but I just want freedom, nothing else. And then just asking 2 or 3 questions like, okay, so what does freedom means to you? 2 or 3 questions in this line, and it becomes visible instantly that those worldly desires were transferred to this meaning of freedom. And when freedom is reached, somewhere there inside, there's this hope that all these that have been put aside will be rewarded by that freedom, that ultimate freedom. And that makes your work to be still feeding the same structures. What to say about the seeker of well-being, which is assailed and wants to swallow everything like a black hole? He wants all the worldly desires, comforts, realizations, and the spiritual also. And he aspires for that greatness. What to say about him? And what does these categories mean? Do they mean that you are fit or you are unfit? No. They clarify you where you're standing now, and if freedom is really what you want, where you have to move to. This is what these categories are there pointing. If you're still confused and pointing towards the realizations, the gratifications of sense perceptions of that individual, but freedom is what you want, then a complete mindset change has to come, a different attitude. And if you find yourself as a seeker of truth, all these alignments has to be put in place. And usually these are extremes, and seekers find themselves somewhere in the middle of those extremes and working to those who are seekers of truth, of course, because there are those also that are spiritual in nature, whatever that means, Not everybody is spiritual in nature, but that's not the point. Those who are in spiritual circumstances, but they are moving towards greatness. They behave like kings that are trying to find the biggest castle in the highest mountain. They want to satisfy everything. And unless they find humility and sacrifice, without humility, sacrifice cannot be there, because without humility, sacrifice is nothing but investment. Without that, they don't even count on this exposition, because they are just worldly people in spiritual environments. That's it. What they fail to realize in the worldly experiences, they are bringing the divine into that equation so that it can make everything right and okay. And as this spirituality, these spiritual teachings have become mainstream, there's a lot of teachings available. A lot of. By comparison, you have the old teachings, the stories that show you unequivocally what was the life of a seeker of truth. How were the teachings? All of that. And if you see a movie, for example, which is made for adults, and if you compare that movie to a movie that is made for children, you will see a fundamental difference between these two movies. Normal movies, not spiritual ones, just random normal movies. Those who are made for adults, they come in a specific way. And those who are made for children, they are very different. More naive, more simple, more fantasy-driven. It's like, well, it's hard for an adult to take it very seriously, in a sense. It is the same thing with spiritual teachings. And if you look at spiritual teachings and you compare with those ancient stories, they will give you a feedback, and you will see that it is the same thing. Those were the adult version, and these are the children version. So the spiritual seeker, the seeker of truth, that is looking for God, to merge with God in that infinite love. And that spiritual seeker that is looking for God, to rest ashore on his lap and to be taken care of as an infant. These are different levels of maturity. One is for dissolution, the other is for self-preservation. But if love is there, it evolves. It evolves. So spiritual teachings, you just have to look at them. Is this preserving worldly desires, or is this going against them? Is this preserving this individual from abstracting, letting go of his attachments, or Are these teachings preserving these individual attachments? And these days, there is a very common sentence that in spiritual matters, everyone is giving their 2 cents. And that's because they don't have $1. So they just give 2 cents. And that's their wisdom. If you want to see the validity of teachings, the higher they are, the more this worldly character that is so attached, so eager for these worldly realizations, the more it trembles. If you're, well, that is a good sign. If fears are arising, it is a good sign. If you're relaxing and just being relieved, well, that's not a good sign. Well, good sign, that depends. Good and bad depends on the real quest that is there. Those who are looking for freedom, and they are exposed to a teaching that preserves their attachments, you will feel this, and then it is, not good. Those who are looking for the divine just as another worldly reward, they will feel safe and established and relief that they don't have to touch any of their delusion boundaries. Because that's what it is. So I hear a lot of questions, especially for those who are in the beginning. But do I have to let go of my life? Well, for the majority, that the best answer would be yes. But in reality, the answer is no. But those who are asking this question will get the relief from the answer. And they fail to understand the complete version of the answer. Because it's not about circumstances. But those who are in the quest for freedom, really, if they find that this is holding me in some way, that I'm attached to this in some way, they will leave it. Because leaving it, cutting the distance, cutting the connection, will bring the fears, will bring all those will bring the ropes that were binding him to that, and he may actually, concretely grow beyond those attachments. And that means to move beyond the boundaries of their delusion. And their world, their perception becomes bigger. Is that an improvement? Yes. In practical terms, a narrow world and a wider world vision, they are the same, more or less, the same. But for the seeker of truth, for the one who has moved from this tighter delusion to a wider one, he had an experience that it is very important, fundamental. He has seen that those limitations that were there, and I mean real limitations, though the letting goes of those things that were vital And as he goes through that, through the pain, through all the intensity of everything that arises, the sadness and all of that, and sometimes these are long periods, and he finally moves beyond them, he will see that those limitations don't exist. And it doesn't matter how wider the world has become, his world, but it cannot hold him in the same way that it was holding him previously. Because if that which I believed to the point of almost getting crazy, of almost because sometimes these processes are like you're going to explode or something, and then I can see clearly that it doesn't, then how will the next one hold me in the same way? It won't. So this is why in certain stages, and in yoga, for example, it is spoken a lot about sacrifices, detachment, abandoning all of these things, because they are a need for you to see beyond your world. And in the most advanced stages, they say nothing of that is necessary. Circumstances have nothing to do. There is nothing to let go. They are all correct. But these last ones, they are the product of direct vision. If they are not the product of direct vision, they are nothing. And if you're looking at them, feeling relief, this is your clear sign. And you'll take it or you won't. But it is a clear sign. So these movements that these sages and saints, and there are still actual seekers presently doing this. These are means to an end. It's not about, oh, I'm letting go everything and what? And what? Most of these that enter into these ideas like this, if they can move quickly, if they can do this more or less easily, they are just transferring one set of beliefs to another set of circumstances. Same beliefs, just changing the circumstances. In some way, somewhere, some sense, this will bring an experience of almost psychological death. And then what comes after, what gets reborn, is different. So spiritual disciplines, they come and they teach you. When you practice yoga or meditation, you have to establish yourself in a routine. Why? Because this brings transformation. It makes you cut ties with a certain kind of reality and delusion, and establish a different kind of reality / delusion. But the difference between them is, once you have cut with this old delusion, this new one will not have, by any means, the same level of power. And then this solution becomes factual, becomes possible. Before that, it is just mental concepts that can bring apparent wisdom, and that's not really a good sign. So at every moment, behind every movement of this character, the need is self-gratification in some sense. So attention has to be present all the time. All the time. And if you let yourself distracted, just practicing without evaluate your motivations, if you let yourself distract the slightest, these individual needs get imposed on your spiritual work, that intense freedom, and starts feeding again the old structures. Some look at these words and they'll say, well, if it doesn't make a difference, then why bother and give to the old work? Fine. Others say, well, if this is so difficult and it makes a little tiny difference, so I must intensify my work. Everybody defends what is more dearly for them, and whatever you're defending gives you a feedback of the motivations behind your efforts. So those, for example, who are in the middle of a process of letting go of their attachments, abandoning everything, whatever, and they want to be successful if they don't have enough trust inside themselves. There are some that seek opinion of others. And in this seeking opinion of others, there are some that seek the opinion of those who have gone through that process, who have lived them and are intensely and continuously intensifying that process. And there are those who go to the others who haven't and quite opposed it. And what will make the difference to that seeker? His motivations. Because if he's reeling after detachment, for example, of course he will go after those who have gone through it. If he's trying to counter his, how do you say this, his inner challenges, he will go to those who will help protect all these structures. So eventually it has nothing to do with anyone else. It is just you. And if the seeker of truth is there, all these tendencies can be there. But if you're a seeker of truth, you are observing these things. And you will see, is this bringing relief? And relief to who? To what? Is this bringing fear, despair? Is it to who? To what? And these are clear signs, clear indications of your real motivations. And if they are in tune with that, with the quest for freedom, they will help and they need to be enforced. If they are not, they need to be changed. Okay, I will answer your question now. Hello Shrima, I'm a serious truth seeker. I discovered your videos lately and they help a lot, thank you. I will follow closely. Okay, so my question is, what are the differences between the dreamless deep sleep and the absolute? Well, my friend, this is a very generic question and it would help if you put a little bit more something into it. Because concepts may help a little bit, but I'm not much into these concepts. But not to disqualify the question immediately, because you see, there is this practice of trying to logically understand these things and then trying to reach them. But this doesn't take too far. But not to disqualify it. I can resume this very simply. I can go deeper into this if you can add a little bit more. If it is seen that it is not just a doubt from here, but something that is really important to you. But the fundamental difference between this is dreamless deep sleep, even by your experience. You can, because that is the only thing you have. It is equal as lights out. You see? Lights out. And the absolute, lights completely on, maximum on. Lights off, lights on. This can say not much, but it can say a lot. That depends on you. But these generic questions, I don't give too much importance to this. You see, it is much more important to put the questions that are heartfelt, that are an obstacle in your spiritual path. Those are the important ones. The rest is just noise. But if you want to increase this a little bit, to increment this, to explain better, then maybe I can elaborate a little bit more for you. So there was a question made in a post that was done about spiritual teachings. A little bit what I covered today, but in a different angle. In a sense of, not that different, but more elaborated maybe. The sense of reading the teachings and identifying the nature of them. By example of, is there relief or is there restlessness, fear arising? And this shows if it is in tune with these individual needs or it has a higher purpose. And the question was, this is beautiful, the text explained very impactfully, but tell me, is it to be that we need to be vigilant with our motivations, what they say to us, or is that we need to be vigilant of our motivations? An example, who or what motivate us and how? Well, this is always about your motivations, you see? There is very few seekers really, really, how do you say, following their master's teachings or whatever. Very few. The majority is following that which suits better according to their motivations. So people say, oh, but that teacher, that master, he is good or he's bad or whatever. These are just opinions according to own motivations. So your motivations need to be completely a check. This is how I start this satsang today. Looking at your own motivations. And I explain the difference. those want everything, and those want nothing, just freedom. The first ones are in the path of self-aggrandizement. I'm not sure if this word is really pronounced this way, but I think you got the point. And the others are moving towards complete humility. What is really humility? It is silence. See, the humble one, you pinch it and there's no reaction. It's not just about psychological characteristics. It is far beyond that. So it is always about your motivations. That is what makes you establish if something is good or not. Of course, there's more into it, but eventually, because there's something very common. For example, and I see this a lot also here. People come, they ask a question, I give an answer, and eventually, sometime later, they tell me, oh, but you said this and this to me. I didn't. I said this and this and this. But that means this and this and this. No, means this, this and this. Because according to your motivations, even what you're listening, you will assign as possible. There are some things that it is impossible. But as possible, you will assign a different meaning, a meaning that fits your individual narratives. It is a human condition. For example, you may be in a situation that you thought it will be very good. Then that situation starts to show up, this is not connected to the very good that I was expecting. But the hope is there. So as this hope is more important, you will reinterpret things as you can to keep this. If it's not possible, then you let go and you maintain these ones. It's very difficult to let go of these ones towards the other ones. But that is the process of the seeker of truth. So your motivations, by far, they are the most important things. Everything comes by consequence of motivations. And motivations, superficial motivations, that you can access clearly, directly, they are not very clarifying, usually. It takes time, silence, to be able to see what's really underneath. So those who have been studying the physical universe, they say that the universe is expanding. Expanding to where? From the human perspective, expanding infinitely because you cannot see the end. So this is how the illusion goes. There is a movement that moves away constantly from a center. Attention moves, expands continuously. Either going naturally, either being pulled. Those are just appearances. When you sit and close your eyes and you try to maintain silence, to be there at the source of the I, you will see that thoughts arise and attention moves towards them a lot, and you forget, especially in the beginning, as these individual desires, all types of desires haven't been cut. It will be almost impossible to remain at the center. But even this can be trained to remain at the center. But that doesn't mean dissolution. If you're keeping these, staying there in silence, into just these moments of practice, and then you switch to the mode of investing, maintaining, preserving, so the real silence comes from the attitude. First, cutting all these desires. Make it very distinct, very clear. And that which you see that it is not possible to cut, you'll keep an eye on it. You will not give excuses. Oh, but there's no need to do this. No. You'll take it with humility. It is not possible for me yet. And you'll keep up the work until you can make it possible. So the goal for truth has to be aligned with motivations. And that gives you work, hard work, because if that is really what you want, you will have to understand that you are the obstacle to that. And you need to transform this, align these inner motivations with that highest goal. Okay, so for today, it's everything. So next satsang will be Wednesday, 9 o'clock Brazilian time. That means UTC -3. So reflect on these words if you deem of your interest, and work hard, make it real for you. If you have any questions about what has been spoken, you can send them to that number that appears there, or through the chat or whatever. But for those who are going to see this video in the future, whatever that means, they can send to that number, and as soon as possible I will answer in satsang. Okay? Okay.